Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Especially when we show kindness in the most unlikely places. In today's story, we follow the journey of a young boy named Jake, who, despite facing his own struggles, steps in to help an elderly couple in need. Little does he know, this simple act of kindness will set off a series of events that will change his life forever. Join us today for a story of compassion, hope, and a fresh start. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's journey with life stories. It was one of those bright, bustling days when the sun seemed to pour through every window, casting golden light on the faces of everyone who passed by. The diner on the corner was no exception, its walls glowing with warmth, filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of silverware against porcelain plates. A typical Saturday afternoon, I sat at a corner table, barely aware of the crowd, lost in the discomfort of my own hunger. My name is Jake, and at 14 years old, I already knew the weight of responsibility far more than any kid should. I wasn't here for a casual meal, I was here to meet my friend Lucas, who worked in the kitchen. His shift was ending soon, and I was waiting for him so we could grab something to eat. Even though I knew the money I had wouldn't be enough to pay for anything fancy. My stomach growled as I stared at the menu in front of me, trying to distract myself from the hunger gnawing at my insides. The printed words blurred together, and my gaze wandered to the servers weaving through the space, their hands full of delicious-looking meals. Plates of golden brown fried chicken, mashed potatoes drenched in rich brown gravy, and freshly baked bread filled the air with mouth-watering scents. The food seemed like a distant dream, something so far out of reach that I couldn't even fathom how to ask for a taste. My fingers twitched at the thought of the small amount of money in my pocket. It wasn't for me, it was for my mother, who worked tirelessly, never asking for much but giving everything she had to make sure I didn't go without. I had been saving for months, skipping snacks at school and doing odd jobs, also I could buy her a proper birthday gift. But right now, that seemed insignificant. The hunger in my stomach was louder than my plans, and I wished I could just sit down and have a meal. Even if it meant spending that precious money meant for something more important. But I didn't. I couldn't. And then, without warning, the noise around me shifted. The quiet murmur of conversation turned to something sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. I looked up and saw a scene unfolding at the far end of the room. An elderly couple, well-dressed and dignified, stood at the center of the commotion, their faces flushed with embarrassment. A man, Greg, the owner of the diner, towered over them, his face twisted in anger. "If you don't have money, you don't eat here," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. His tone was cruel, his words calculated to humiliate. The couple, their names were Mary and Thomas, looked startled, their faces pale as they fumbled through their pockets. They weren't begging for sympathy. They were simply old, and something had gone wrong. They had lost their money. It was an honest mistake. I swear we had it." Mary's voice trembled as she spoke, her hands shaking as she clutched at her scarf. "We must have dropped it somewhere. Please, just let us step outside and retrace our steps. We'll pay, we promise." But Greg wasn't having it. He sneered at them, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he continued to berate them. "Yeah, sure, like I haven't heard that one before. First, it's, I lost my wallet. Then it's, oh, please, let me work it off in the kitchen. I don't run a charity here. You think I'm stupid?" The words stung me. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. But I stayed seated. No one else in the diner spoke up. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one intervened. There was a man in a suit who muttered something under his breath and looked away quickly. One woman dabbed her mouth with a napkin and glanced at the scene with disinterest. I felt the tightness in my chest grow. Mary and Thomas looked completely defeated. They weren't trying to scam anyone. They weren't trying to pull a fast one. They were just an elderly couple, in the wrong place at the wrong time. I couldn't stand it. I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor, the noise pulling the eyes of everyone in the room toward me. The tension in the air was thick. And for a brief moment, I could feel the weight of 100 stares on me. But I didn't care. My heart pounded in my chest. I walked toward the couple, stepping directly between them and Greg, and I faced him. "That's enough," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline that was now coursing through me. "You don't need to talk to them like that." Greg's expression shifted into a twisted grin. "Oh, look, a little hero," he sneered, his arms crossing over his chest. "What are you gonna do? Kid? Lecture me about respect?" I didn't back down. I wasn't going to. They didn't mean to lose their money. They're not trying to scam you. Greg's eyes darkened, and he took a step forward, his voice lowering to a dangerous level. "You feel bad for them, don't you? You think because they look like you, I won't toss them out on their asses?" The words hit harder than I expected. I felt my breath catch in my throat. But I didn't flinch. I didn't have time to think about what he said. What mattered was that Mary and Thomas needed help. And I could give it. The room was silent. And in that moment, I realized I had no other choice. I pulled the crumpled bills from my pocket, the money I had saved for my mother's birthday, and slapped it onto the counter. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Greg hesitated, his gaze flicking from the money to me, his expression faltering for just a moment. He scoffed, but he grabbed the cash and stuffed it into the register, muttering something under his breath. "Fine," he grumbled, "but don't come crying when they play you for a fool." I turned to Mary and Thomas, who looked both shocked and grateful. Mary reached for my hand, her voice shaky as she spoke. "You didn't have to do that, dear," she whispered. I smiled, though it was small and tired. "Everyone needs help sometimes," I replied. They left quietly, and the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. People continued eating, chatting, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had done, what I had given up, was something much bigger than just a meal. It was a choice to act with compassion when it seemed easier to look away. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, it's the smallest gestures that can change the course of a life. The moment I sat back down at my table, the weight of what I had just done settled heavily on my chest. I stared at the empty space where the crumpled bills had been. I had spent months saving that money for my mother, scraping together every penny I could find. But I had given it all away in an instant. And yet, even though my stomach still churned with hunger and regret, I knew it was the right thing to do. Still, the feeling of emptiness lingered. I had no way of getting that money back, and I couldn't shake the thought of what I had just sacrificed. As the minutes ticked by, the restaurant buzzed with life. People ate their meals, talked to each other, oblivious to the small act of kindness I had just done. The clink of forks against plates, the sizzle of food being served, it was all so normal. So mundane. But to me, everything felt different now. I was hyper-aware of every little sound, every movement around me. My thoughts kept circling back to the couple, Mary and Thomas. I had barely caught a glimpse of their faces when I intervened. And now I felt an overwhelming urge to do something more. I couldn't just leave it at that. I had to make sure they got their wallet back. I glanced around the restaurant, scanning the faces of the diners, hoping to spot them again. But they were nowhere in sight. I stood up, pacing back and forth for a moment, trying to figure out my next move. My mind raced, thinking of all the places they could have gone, the path they might have taken when they left the diner. They had seemed so lost, so distraught, and I knew they hadn't been able to afford a taxi. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that I had a chance to make things right. I stepped outside into the cool air, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The street was busy with people walking past, the familiar sounds of the city filling the air. But I could feel the urgency building in me. I checked my pockets to make sure I had the wallet still. It was heavier now, as if the weight of my decision had seeped into it. I needed to find them. I walked down the block, eyes scanning every corner, every face. My footsteps quickened, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. What if I never found them? What if I lost the chance to make things right? The thought gnawed at me. My feet carried me faster, And before I could stop myself, I found myself standing at the entrance of the police station. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then I remembered the officer at the diner. The one who had taken the wallet from me. Maybe he could help. Maybe he could track down the couple and return the wallet to them. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The station was quiet, almost too quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed too loud in the silence. Behind the desk, an officer looked up at me, his gaze scanning me for a moment before he spoke. "Something you need, kid?" he asked, his voice neutral. I swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. I found a wallet. It belongs to an elderly couple, Mary and Thomas. They were at the diner down the street. But I couldn't catch up with them. The officer raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything at first. He reached out and took the wallet from me. Flipping it open, "I'll try to get in touch with them," he said, looking through the contents. "Is there a number for you in case they want to reach you?" I hesitated for a second. But then I gave him my number. I wanted to make sure the couple got their wallet back, even if it meant taking a few extra steps. The officer scribbled it down and nodded. "We'll take it from here," he said, and just like that, it was out of my hands. I stepped back into the cool night air, a weight lifting slightly from my shoulders. I had done what I could. I had done everything I could. The feeling of uncertainty still hung over me. Though, what would happen now? Would they be able to reach Mary and Thomas? Or was this all in vain? I walked home slowly, the distance between me and my apartment seeming longer than usual. My mind kept returning to that moment in the diner, the look of gratitude in the couple's eyes, the warmth in their voices. I had done the right thing. I kept telling myself, but I didn't know if it was enough. It wasn't just about the money. It was about making sure they weren't forgotten. About proving that kindness could still exist in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. As I reached the door to my apartment, I couldn't shake the thought that I had done something meaningful, something real. But even so, I knew it wasn't over. I couldn't rest until I was sure that Mary and Thomas had what they needed. That everything would be okay for them. Just as I hoped it would be for my mother. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Kindness had the power to change everything. The next morning was cold. The kind of chilly air that seemed to seep through the cracks of our modest apartment. I woke up early, the faint light of dawn creeping through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow on the worn kitchen table. My mother, Claire, was already up, stirring a pot of oatmeal on the stove. I sat at the table, pushing a spoon through my own bowl, trying to ignore the hunger gnawing at me. The oatmeal was thin, stretched with extra water to make it last longer. A small reminder that we were scraping by. The silence between us felt heavy, as it often did lately. We had been through so much over the past few months. My mother worked late shifts, always exhausted, always on the brink of giving up. She had stopped eating full meals so I could have more. And I had done my best to help her, even if it meant going without. The bills stacked on the counter. The flickering light above our heads. All of it reminded me of what we didn't have. We were just getting by. And I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep this up. As I pushed the spoon around in my bowl, the knock at the door startled me. It was early, too early for visitors. I looked up, wondering if it was just another one of those knocks that came with a bill collector or a neighbor asking for something. My mother hesitated before getting up, her tired hands brushing the kitchen table as she made her way to the door. When she opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Standing there in the hallway were the same elderly couple I had helped the day before, Mary and Thomas. But now, there was something different about them. They weren't just a couple who had misplaced their wallet, there was an air of certainty about them. A calm presence that made the small apartment feel even smaller. "Good morning, dear," Mary said, her voice warm and soft, her eyes full of something unspoken. "I had a feeling we'd find you here." I stood frozen, my heart racing. How had they found me? How had they known where to come? They had left the diner without any hint of where they were headed. It didn't make sense. "How did you?" I began to ask, but Thomas, ever the calm presence, stepped forward. "The police called," he said simply, glancing around the apartment with a knowing look. They told us someone turned in our wallet. And we knew it had to be you. My mother stood behind me. Her expression puzzled. What's going on? She asked. Her voice laced with confusion. Mary smiled at her, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of understanding. We didn't just come here to return the wallet, she said gently. We came because we saw something yesterday. Something rare. At that moment, I could feel the weight of their words pressing down on me. My mother's face shifted from confusion to curiosity as she glanced between me and the couple. What was happening? What did they want? Thomas stepped forward, his movements deliberate but kind. After we left the diner, we made a few calls. We asked around. Your friend Lucas told us about you. About how you've been working after school, saving every penny to help your mother. He paused, letting his words sink in. We know what you've been sacrificing, Jake. You've been going without so she could have a little more. You never ask for anything. Not even when you need it. I stood still, stunned. How could they know all this? It was like they could see right through me. Right into my soul. How could they know everything I'd been carrying? The weight of my mother's struggles. The quiet desperation I felt to keep her from breaking? Mary's voice softened, but it carried a quiet strength. Jake, we came here because we saw something in you. Something rare. We want to help you. Both of you. Her words hung in the air, and my breath caught in my chest. Help us? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded, pulling something from his coat pocket. It was a small, folded stack of bills, and he held it out to me. This isn't about the money you gave us yesterday. It's about something more. We know what it's like to struggle, and we want to make sure that you don't have to anymore. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't do it for money, I said quickly, shaking my head. Mary chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. We know that, Jake, she said, her eyes soft with understanding. That's exactly why we're here. I looked at my mother, whose eyes had begun to fill with uncertainty. She was holding herself together, but I could see the vulnerability behind her gaze. What are you saying? She asked, her voice hesitant. Thomas exchanged a glance with Mary, and then he turned back to us. We want to offer you a fresh start, he said quietly. A proper home, a stable future, a chance for Jake to go to a better school. For both of you to have the opportunities you deserve. No more worrying about where the next meal will come from. No more struggling. The room seemed to fall away. I felt the weight of their words pressing against me, as though the world had shifted on its axis. A better school? A stable future? Was this real? I looked at my mother, searching her face for any hint of doubt or disbelief. But I saw nothing but a quiet sadness. She had worked so hard to keep us afloat. And yet here were two strangers, offering us something we had never even dared to dream of. A chance. A real chance. Why would you do this? I asked, my voice trembling. Mary smiled gently, her eyes never leaving mine. Because, Jake, you're worth believing in. And when we see someone like you, someone who does the right thing without expecting anything in return, we don't turn away. I stood there, speechless. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the weight of the decision ahead of me felt unbearable. I had never imagined a moment like this, where everything could change in the blink of an eye. But now, standing here with Mary and Thomas, I realized that this moment was everything. It was a chance to start over, to have something more than just survival. And for the first time in a long time, I dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could have something better. Something real. As I stood there, facing Mary and Thomas, the weight of their offer settled into my heart. Not as a burden, but as a promise, one that I never thought I would have the chance to receive. My mother, her eyes filled with emotion, squeezed my hand as if silently asking for my decision. Jake, she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Is this real? I looked at her. The woman who had sacrificed so much to give me everything she could. Even when there was nothing left, I looked back at the couple who had seen something in me that I hadn't even seen in myself. The choice felt impossible, but at that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about money. It was about hope. About finding the strength to believe in a future that didn't feel so heavy with struggle. Yes, I said, my voice shaking but steady. It's real. Mary and Thomas smiled, their faces full of warmth and reassurance. The next chapter of our lives, one we never expected, was about to begin. I realized that sometimes, it takes someone else's belief in you to remind you of your own strength. With their help, I could see the possibility of a different life. A life where my mother wouldn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. A life where I could dream beyond survival and find the courage to live fully. And so, as I stood there, on the cusp of a new beginning, I knew that this moment, this act of kindness, had changed everything. It was a reminder that even in the hardest times, the smallest act of kindness can set a new course, a new hope, for those willing to embrace it. Thank you for watching this story of life and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more meaningful stories. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it.